Hi everyone, welcome to Lesson 3. Now that we know what an argument is and what arguments are built out of, we now have a new question, which is, when we are presented with arguments in our daily lives, how do we recognize them? And as we'll see, there are some challenges for this. This is not always easy to do. Hopefully we can get some techniques and tips. You'll also see that there's a quiz attached to this lesson. And as we're going to see, sometimes it's not always easy to tell whether we're dealing with an argument or not. But anyway, let's see if we can make some progress here. So first of all, let's look at this argument on the screen. It says, all film stars are celebrities. Halle Berry is a film star. Therefore, Halle Berry is a celebrity. Now, this is an argument, of course, and I want to point out here that the argument is presented in this little area here where I have one box with the premises and a nice handy arrow, and then down here something else that the arrow leads to, and of course that's our conclusion. But here's the thing. In life, rarely do people ever put their arguments in this form. I wish that they did. I'm trying to start a petition to do this, but unfortunately it doesn't happen. So what do we use instead? So how are we going to tell the difference between the premises and the conclusion? And as you probably notice, our biggest hint is right here, this word therefore that's underlined. And we're going to call this our conclusion indicator. So oftentimes this can be a good first step when we're trying to determine whether something is an argument. Look for the conclusion indicator. Now there are many different types of conclusion indicators that we can look for. Words like therefore, thus, consequently, we may infer, accordingly, we may conclude, it must be that, for this reason, so, this entails that, hence, it follows that, this implies that, as a result, ergo, and QED. One last note on QED. It actually stands for Quod erat demonstrandum, which means in Latin, what was to be proved, what was to be demonstrated. You usually see that one in mathematics. Now, let's look at an example of this in action. So here's an example of conclusion indicator. First example here, tortured prisoners will say anything just to relieve the pain. Consequently, torture is not a reliable method of interrogation. Here, as you notice, the word consequently is underlined here, and of course it functions as our conclusion indicator, telling us that torture is not a reliable method of interrogation. That's our conclusion. Next example. An agreement cannot bind unless both parties to the agreement know what they are doing and freely choose to do it. This implies that the seller who intends to enter a contract with a customer has a duty to disclose exactly what the customer is buying and what the terms of the sale are. Here again, this implies that is underlined, and we see that this implies that is our conclusion indicator. Now, in addition to conclusion indicators, we also have premise indicators. Premise indicators tell us that we are dealing or looking at reasons. So some examples of premise indicators include since, as indicated by, because, for, in that, may be inferred from, as, given that, seeing that, for the reason that, owing to, is evidenced by. And sometimes people will simply just label their reasons. They'll say things like, the first reason is, or my second reason is, or they'll simply label them first, second, third, and so on. Let's look at an example of a premise indicator in action. So here's an example. Expectant mothers should never use recreational drugs since the use of these drugs can jeopardize the development of the fetus. In this example, since is our premise indicator, and this tells us that everything that's after this is actually our reason. So if you look over here on the right, the use of recreational drugs can jeopardize the development of the fetus. That's our reason, but the conclusion of that argument is expectant mothers should never use recreational drugs. Let's look at one more example. The fact that there was never a land bridge between Australia and mainland Asia is evidenced by the fact that the animal species in the two areas are very different. Asian placental mammals and Australian marsupial mammals have not been in contact in the last several years. In the last several million years. Now you'll notice here in this example, I did not underline anything. And of course, on the right-hand side here, we have our boxes to tell us where everything is. But notice that right here is evidenced by, that's our premise indicator. And that tells us that everything after the premise indicator is our premises. As you can see, they're listed up here. And that tells us then that the conclusion of this argument is the fact that there was never a land bridge between Australia and mainland Asia. So the conclusion in this case comes first. Now, one more thing I'd like to point out. Notice here that the premise indicators and the conclusion indicators make our lives a lot easier. It's a lot easier to find out what an argument is or how it's built if those indicators are present. Just as an exercise, try reading this paragraph without the indicators. Okay, let's try that. The fact that there was never a land bridge between Australia and mainland Asia. So let's just say we said that. There was never a land bridge between Australia and mainland Asia. The animal species in the two areas are very different. Asian placental mammals and Australian marsupial mammals have not been in contact in the last several million years. Notice that it now becomes a lot more difficult to determine what the argument is. Now this leads us to one final problem. Just say that if we have an argument where no indicators are present, we have some questions we can ask. First, what statement is claimed to follow from the others? Second, what is the arguer trying to prove, or does there seem to be a main point of the passage? That's our third thing. We can use these questions to try and find the conclusion as we go. As you're going to see in the exercise for today's lesson, I've given you some sample exercises, and some of them, as you're going to see, do not give you indicators. Your job will be to determine whether it's an argument or not. All right, good luck, and I'll see you in the discussion boards. Thank you.